November. The month when darkness comes early and the cold seeps into your bones. When the trees are bare and the fog rolls in thick. These 10 stories all happened in November and they're all true. Let's begin. My name's Marcus, and I work night security at a warehouse just outside of Portland. It's boring work most of the time, which is exactly how I like it. This happened on November 3rd of last year. And I remember the date because it was the first really foggy night of the season. The kind of fog that's so thick you can barely see 10 feet in front of you. I was doing my usual rounds around 2 a.m., walking the perimeter with my flashlight. The warehouse sits on about 5 acres of property, and most of it is just empty lot with a chain link fence around it. My routine is simple. I walk the fence line, check all the gates, and make sure nobody's trying to break in. Takes me about 45 minutes to complete the whole circuit. That night, the fog was so dense that my flashlight beam just disappeared into it. I could barely make out the fence posts as I walked past them. About halfway through my route, I stopped to take a break and check my phone. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not my footsteps, but someone else's, walking parallel to me on the other side of the fence. I froze and listened. The footsteps continued at the exact same pace I had been walking. I called out, asking who was there, but got no response. Just those steady footsteps continuing through the fog. I shined my flashlight toward the sound, but the fog was too thick to see anything. The footsteps stopped the moment I stopped walking. I started moving again, slowly, and sure enough, the footsteps resumed. Matching my pace exactly. It was like someone was mirroring my movements from the other side of the fence. I tried to convince myself it was just an echo or the fog playing tricks on me, but I knew better. Someone was out there. I picked up my pace, walking faster, and the footsteps quickened too. I broke into a jog, and whoever it was started jogging too. My heart was pounding as I rushed back toward the security office. The footsteps followed me the entire way, staying perfectly in sync with mine. Only when I got close to the building with its bright lights did the footsteps finally stop. I locked myself in the office and pulled up the security cameras. We have cameras covering most of the perimeter, but in the fog, they were useless. Everything was just gray static. I sat there for the rest of my shift, too scared to go back outside. The next night, the fog had cleared, and everything seemed normal. I convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing, or that it had been some animal moving through the brush. But then, on November 10th, the fog rolled in again, even thicker than before. And at 2 a.m. during my rounds, I heard them again, those footsteps matching mine perfectly. This time, I decided to test something. I walked to a section of fence where there's a gate, and I stopped right in front of it. The footsteps stopped too. Then I did something crazy. I opened the gate. I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that nobody was there. The gate swung open into the fog, and I stood there, waiting. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then I heard breathing. Not heavy breathing, just normal, steady breathing, like someone standing right in front of me. I stumbled backward and slammed the gate shut, locking it as fast as my shaking hands would allow. I heard a sound that I can only describe as a laugh. Low and quiet, but definitely a laugh. I ran back to the office and quit the next day. I didn't even give 2 weeks' notice. I told my boss I had a family emergency and never came back. The crazy thing is, I found out later that the security guard before me had quit suddenly too, right at the beginning of November the previous year. He never said why, and when I tried to contact him to ask if he'd experienced anything similar, he refused to talk to me. I still think about those footsteps sometimes. about that breathing in the fog, and I wonder if whoever took my job is hearing them now. Story 2. The November Bonfire. My name is Sarah, and I live in a small town in rural Wisconsin. Every year on November 15th, our town has this tradition of having a huge community bonfire. It's supposed to mark the halfway point to winter or something like that. People bring food, kids roast marshmallows, and everyone just hangs out around this massive fire in the town square. It's always been a nice, wholesome event. Last November, I went with my boyfriend Tyler and our friends Amy and Josh. We got there around 7 p.m. when it was already dark. The fire was already going, probably about 15 feet tall, and there were maybe 50 or 60 people gathered around it. It was a cold night, so everyone was huddled close to the flames, trying to stay warm. We found a spot on the far side of the bonfire and settled in with some hot cider. Everything was normal for the first hour. People were laughing, kids were running around, and the fire was crackling away. But then Amy pointed something out that made all of us uncomfortable. She said there was someone standing in the fire. At first I thought she was joking, or maybe she'd had too much spiked cider. But when I looked where she was pointing, my stomach dropped. There was definitely a silhouette of a person standing right in the center of the flames. Not near the fire, not beside it, but directly in the middle of the bonfire. Tyler said it was probably just the way the flames were moving, creating an illusion. But the more I stared at it, the more convinced I became that Amy was right. The shape was too defined, too human. It had a head, shoulders, arms hanging at its sides, and it wasn't flickering or dancing like the flames around it. It was perfectly still. I looked around to see if anyone else had noticed, but everyone seemed to be going about their business normally. Josh suggested we move to a different spot, maybe get a better angle to see what we were actually looking at. We walked about a quarter of the way around the bonfire, and the figure was still there, clear as day. Still standing. Still not moving. That's when things got really weird. The figure started to turn, rotating slowly in place like it was looking around at all of us. I watched as what I can only describe as its head moved from left to right, scanning the crowd. And then it stopped. It stopped turning and faced directly toward our group. Amy grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. She saw it too. We all did. This thing in the fire was looking right at us. I wanted to leave, wanted to grab Tyler and get out of there, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, staring at this impossible figure standing in flames that should have been consuming it. Then it raised its arm. Slowly, deliberately, it lifted one arm and pointed directly at me. Not at our group, but specifically at me. I could feel it. That finger aimed right at my chest. My legs finally started working and I stepped backward, bumping into people behind me. I said sorry without taking my eyes off the fire. Tyler asked me what was wrong, and I tried to explain, but the words came out all jumbled. By the time I managed to point at the figure, it had lowered its arm and resumed that still standing position. Josh said we should tell someone, maybe the fire department volunteers who were supervising the bonfire. But what would we say? That we saw a person made of fire pointing at us? We decided to leave instead. As we were walking away, I made the mistake of looking back one more time. The figure had turned again and it was watching us go. I could feel its gaze on my back the entire walk to the car. The next day, I tried to convince myself we'd all just gotten caught up in some kind of group hallucination. Maybe the smoke had affected our brains or something. But then Amy sent me a photo she'd taken that night. She hadn't even remembered taking it until she was scrolling through her camera roll. It was a picture of the bonfire, and there in the center, you could clearly see the silhouette of a person. The image was blurry and the flames distorted everything, but there was no denying what we were looking at. I asked Amy to delete the photo, and thankfully she did. I don't want any evidence of what we saw. This November, when the town announced the annual bonfire, all 4 of us made excuses not to go. I don't think any of us will ever attend that event again, and sometimes late at night, I still feel like something is pointing at me from far away. Story 3: The Wrong House. I'm Kevin, and I work as a delivery driver for a furniture company in Ohio. It's usually straightforward work. Pick up furniture from the warehouse, drive it to the customer's address, unload it, and move on to the next delivery. This story happened on November 22nd, just a few days before Thanksgiving last year. I had a delivery scheduled for 6 p.m., which was my last stop of the day. The order was for a leather recliner, and the address was in a neighborhood I'd never been to before. It was one of those older suburbs where all the houses look similar, and the streets wind around in confusing patterns. My GPS took me down several residential roads before announcing I'd arrived at the destination. I pulled up in front of a 2-story house with gray siding. All the lights were off inside, which I thought was odd since the customer had specifically requested an evening delivery. I checked the address again and it matched. I called the phone number on the delivery form, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message saying I was outside with their recliner and waited a few minutes. After about 10 minutes of waiting, I decided to just knock on the door. Maybe they were home but didn't hear their phone. I walked up the driveway, noticing how quiet the neighborhood was. No cars driving by, no neighbors outside, just silence. I knocked on the front door and waited. Nothing. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. I was about to head back to my truck and mark the delivery as unsuccessful when I noticed the front door wasn't completely closed. It was open just a crack, maybe an inch or 2. That should have been my sign to leave, but I called out instead, asking if anyone was home. No response. I pushed the door open a little wider and called out again. The inside of the house was completely dark. I could barely make out the shapes of furniture in what looked like a living room. I turned on my phone's flashlight and stepped inside, still calling out. I told myself I was just making sure the customer wasn't injured or something. That I was being a good person by checking. The living room looked normal enough. Couch, TV, coffee table. Everything seemed fine except for the fact that it was freezing cold inside. Colder than it was outside. I could see my breath forming clouds in the beam of my flashlight. I walked further into the house, passing through a doorway into what looked like a dining room. That's when I saw the table. It was set for dinner. 4 place settings with plates, silverware, and glasses. But the food on the plates was completely rotten. I'm talking moldy, decayed, covered in something fuzzy and white. The smell hit me a second later, and I had to fight not to gag. It was like the meal had been sitting there for weeks, maybe months. I backed away from the dining room, my heart starting to pound. Something was very wrong. This couldn't be the right house. I pulled out the delivery form and checked the address one more time. It matched, but there was no way a customer who ordered furniture was living in a house like this. I turned to leave, and that's when I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, heavy footsteps walking across the ceiling above me. I froze listening. The footsteps moved from one end of the house to the other, then stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. Then I heard a door open upstairs, and the footsteps started again, this time heading toward what I assumed were the stairs. I didn't wait to see who or what was coming down. I ran for the front door, my phone's flashlight beam bouncing wildly as I moved. I made it outside and sprinted to my truck, throwing myself into the driver's seat and locking the doors. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I was pulling away, I looked back at the house. There was someone standing in the upstairs window watching me leave. Just a dark silhouette against the darker interior. I couldn't make out any features, just the shape of a person standing perfectly still. I drove straight back to the warehouse and told my supervisor what had happened. He checked the delivery order and his face went pale. He said there must have been a mistake in the system because that address belonged to a house that had been abandoned for over 5 years. The previous owners had apparently died in the house, both of them within days of each other under mysterious circumstances, and no one had bought it since. I asked him who had placed the order then, and he said he didn't know. The payment had gone through, so someone had used a valid credit card. But when we tried to call the phone number again, it said the number was no longer in service. I quit that job 2 weeks later. I couldn't stop thinking about that dining room table with its rotten food, or those footsteps coming down the stairs, or that figure in the window. The worst part is, I still drive past that neighborhood sometimes, and I always make sure to take a different route. I don't ever want to see that house again. Story 4: The Night Shift at the Gas Station. My name's Derek, and up until last month, I worked the night shift at a gas station off Interstate 40 in Tennessee. It's one of those 24-hour places that gets most of its business from truckers and travelers passing through. The overnight shift is from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and it's usually dead quiet between 2 and 5 in the morning. I'd been working there for about 6 months when this happened, right around November 8th. It was a Thursday night, or technically Friday morning, and I was alone in the store. We used to have 2 people on the night shift, but corporate cut hours, so it was just me. The first few hours went by normally. A few customers came in for snacks and gas, and I spent the rest of the time restocking shelves and cleaning. Around 2:30 a.m., a car pulled up to one of the pumps. I watched on the security monitor as someone got out and started pumping gas. They were wearing a dark hoodie, and I couldn't really make out any details. After they finished pumping, I expected them to either pay at the pump or come inside, but they did neither. They just stood there next to their car, facing the store. I waited for a few minutes, watching the monitor. The person didn't move. They just stood there in that same position, staring at the building. It was creepy, but I figured maybe they were on the phone or something. After about 5 minutes, I decided to go check on them. Maybe their card wasn't working and they needed help. I walked outside, and the person was still standing in the exact same spot. As I got closer, I called out, asking if everything was okay. They didn't respond. Didn't even acknowledge that I was there. I was about 20 feet away when I stopped. Something about the situation felt wrong. The person's posture was too stiff, too still. Like a mannequin, I called out again, louder this time, and that's when they turned their head toward me. Not their body, just their head. It rotated slowly until they were looking directly at me. And even though I couldn't see their face clearly in the darkness, I could feel their eyes on me. Heavy and cold. I took a step backward, and the person took a step toward me. I took another step back, and they matched it. My instincts were screaming at me to run, so I did. I turned and ran back into the store, locking the door behind me. My heart was hammering as I watched through the glass. The person had followed me to the door and was now standing right outside, their face pressed against the glass. That's when I finally got a good look at them. and I wish I hadn't. Their skin was gray, almost colorless. Their eyes were completely black, no whites at all. And they were smiling. Not a normal smile, but one that stretched too wide, showing too many teeth. I grabbed my phone and called 911, backing away from the door. The person outside started scratching at the glass with their fingernails, making this horrible scraping sound. The dispatcher answered and I tried to explain what was happening, but I was talking so fast that I don't think they understood me. Then the person stopped scratching and just stood there, still smiling. They raised one hand and placed it flat against the glass, and where their palm touched, the glass started to frost over. Like ice spreading from their hand. I watched in horror as the frost crept across the entire door, turning the glass completely opaque white. I couldn't see them anymore, but I could hear them. They were whispering something, the same words over and over, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. The whispering got louder and louder until it felt like it was coming from inside my own head. The police arrived about 10 minutes later, though it felt like hours. When they got there, the person was gone. The only evidence that anything had happened was the frosted glass on the door, which was slowly melting. The officers searched the area but didn't find anyone. They checked the security footage, but the cameras had somehow stopped recording from 2:30 until the moment I called 911. There was no video of the car, the person, or anything that had happened. The police asked me a lot of questions, and I could tell they didn't believe me. They probably thought I was on drugs or making it up for attention. But the frost on the door was real. They couldn't explain that away. Eventually they left, telling me to call if anything else happened. I finished my shift because I needed the money, but I put in my 2 weeks' notice that same day. I couldn't work there anymore, not after what I'd seen. The thing that really messed me up was the car. I'd watched this person get out of a car and pump gas, but when I went to check the pump after everything happened, there was no record of a transaction. No payment, no gallons pumped, nothing. Like they'd never been there at all. I still have nightmares about that smile and those black eyes. And sometimes late at night I can still hear that whispering. Story 5. The Trail Camera. I'm Mike, and I'm an avid hunter from northern Minnesota. Every year before hunting season, I set up trail cameras on my property to track deer movement and figure out the best spots for my tree stand. I've got about 40 acres of wooded land, and I usually put out 4 or 5 cameras in different locations. Last year, I set up my cameras in early November, right after Halloween. I placed one near a creek bed where I'd seen deer tracks, another by a clearing where they like to feed, and a few others scattered throughout the woods. The cameras are motion activated and they take a photo whenever something moves in front of them. Usually I get hundreds of pictures of deer, raccoons, the occasional coyote, and sometimes my own dogs if they wander out too far. I left the cameras out for about a week before going to collect the SD cards and review the footage. When I got to the first camera, the one by the creek, I noticed something strange right away. The camera had taken over 600 photos in just 1 week, which was way more than usual. I figured maybe there was a lot of animal activity in that area, which would be good news for hunting. I took the SD card home and loaded it onto my computer. The first 100 photos or so were normal. Deer, some turkeys, a fox. But then I got to a series of photos taken on November 4th, starting at 11:47 p.m. The first photo in the series showed a person standing in front of the camera. They were maybe 15 feet away, just standing there in the middle of the woods in the middle of the night. They were wearing regular clothes, jeans and a jacket, but no hunting gear or anything that would explain why they'd be on my property. I couldn't make out their face because they were looking down at the ground. I was annoyed, figuring it was a trespasser. Maybe someone cutting through my property to get somewhere else. The next photo, taken 30 seconds later, showed the same person in almost the exact same position. They'd barely moved. Then the next photo, same thing. And the next. For over an hour, the camera captured photos of this person just standing there, shifting slightly but never leaving. It was like they were frozen in place. Then, at 12:52 a.m., something changed. In that photo, the person was looking directly at the camera, staring right into the lens. I zoomed in on their face, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Their eyes were reflecting the camera's flash, glowing white like an animal's eyes. But humans' eyes don't do that. The angle was wrong, the reflection was too bright, too unnatural. The photos continued. Every 30 seconds, another image of this person staring at the camera with those glowing eyes. This went on for another 2 hours. Just standing there staring. Not moving, not doing anything else. Just staring. Then at 2:47 a.m., the person was suddenly much closer to the camera. They'd moved from 15 feet away to maybe 5 feet away, but there were no photos of them walking forward. One moment they were far away, the next they were right in front of the lens. Their face filled the entire frame, those glowing eyes taking up most of the image. The final photo in the series, taken at 2:48 a.m., was completely black. Just darkness. But I could make out something in the blackness if I adjusted the brightness. There was a handprint on the camera lens, like someone had reached out and covered it with their palm. When I went back to retrieve that camera, I found it on the ground, lying in the leaves about 10 feet from where I'd mounted it. The mounting bracket was still attached to the tree, but the camera had been torn off of it. The lens had a crack running through it, right where that handprint had been in the photo. I checked the other cameras, and they all had similar images. The same person, appearing at different locations on my property on the same night, always around the same time. Standing, staring, then getting impossibly close to the cameras. One of my other cameras had been ripped down too, though the rest were left alone. I called the police and showed them the photos. They said it looked like a trespasser and offered to patrol the area more frequently. But I knew it wasn't just some random person wandering through. The way they moved, or didn't move, the way they appeared in multiple locations miles apart within minutes of each other. Those eyes. It wasn't natural. I haven't put my cameras back up this year. In fact, I'm thinking about selling the property. I still go out there during the day sometimes, but never at night. Never. And I always have the feeling that someone is watching me from the trees, waiting for it to get dark. Story 6. The Wrong Reflection. My name is Alicia, and I'm a college student in Massachusetts. Last November, I was studying for finals in my apartment, which I shared with my roommate Hannah. It was November 19th, and I remember because it was exactly 1 week before Thanksgiving break. Hannah had already left to visit her family, so I was alone in the apartment for the first time since we'd moved in together back in August. I was up late, probably around midnight, sitting at my desk in my bedroom. My desk faces a window and I'd put up curtains, but they were thin enough that I could see the reflection of my room in the glass when it was dark outside. I'd been studying for hours and decided to take a break to stretch and grab some water. When I stood up, I glanced at the window and saw my reflection stand up too. Nothing weird about that, right? Except my reflection didn't stop moving when I did. I froze, watching as my reflection continued to stretch, raising its arms above its head while mine were still at my sides. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating from lack of sleep. I blinked hard and looked again. My reflection was facing me now, hands on its hips, head tilted to the side. I wasn't moving at all. My heart started pounding as I stared at this impossible thing. My reflection, but not my reflection, moving independently in the window glass. Then it smiled at me. I wasn't smiling. I stumbled backward away from the window, and my reflection took a step forward, toward the glass from its side. Like it was approaching me. I wanted to run out of the room, but I couldn't look away. I was terrified that if I turned my back, something terrible would happen. The reflection raised one hand and placed it against the glass from the inside. I could see the palm pressed flat against the window from within the reflection. Then it started to push, and I watched in absolute horror as the glass began to bend outward. Not break, but flex and bulge like it was made of rubber. I finally found the strength to move and ran out of my bedroom, slamming the door behind me. I stood in the hallway, breathing hard, trying to figure out what to do. I grabbed my phone and called Hannah, but she didn't answer. It was past midnight, so she was probably asleep. I tried calling my mom, but got the same result. I was alone with whatever that thing was in my room. I spent the next hour sitting on the couch in the living room with all the lights on, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. But I knew I hadn't. I'd seen it too clearly for too long. It was real. Around 2 a.m., I heard something from my bedroom. A tapping sound, like fingernails on glass. Tap, 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 rhythmic and persistent. I turned on my phone's voice recorder, thinking that if something happened to me, at least there would be evidence. The tapping continued for about 5 minutes, then stopped. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch until the sun came up, and only then did I work up the courage to open my bedroom door. Everything looked normal. My desk, my books, my bed. I approached the window slowly, afraid of what I might see. The curtains were pulled back, something I definitely hadn't done. And on the window glass, there were handprints. 4 of them, as if someone had pressed both hands against the window from the inside, twice. But that was impossible. There was no one in my room. There never had been. The handprints were on the inside of the glass, but I was the only person in the apartment. I packed a bag and left within the hour. I stayed with a friend for the rest of the week and told Hannah everything when she got back. She thought I was stressed from finals and had experienced some kind of break. But when we went into my room together, the handprints were still there. She couldn't explain them either. We tried to clean them off, but they wouldn't come off. No matter what we used, glass cleaner, soap, alcohol, the prints remained. They looked almost burned into the glass. Eventually, I switched rooms with Hannah. I couldn't sleep in there anymore. She was skeptical about the whole thing until one night in December when she came running out of my old room, white as a sheet. She said she'd seen someone in the window reflection, watching her. Someone who looked exactly like her but wasn't quite right. We moved out of that apartment in January, breaking our lease early. I don't care what the explanation is, scientific or otherwise. I know what I saw, and I know those handprints came from something that shouldn't exist. I'm terrified of reflections now. I avoid mirrors at night. I close my laptop when I'm not using it, and I never, ever look at dark windows after the sun goes down. Story 7. The Corn Maze. I'm Jessica, and I live in Iowa, where cornfields stretch for miles in every direction. Every fall, one of the local farms sets up a huge corn maze as a fundraiser. It's a tradition for high school kids to go through it in groups, especially in the weeks leading up to Thanksgiving. Last year on November 11th, I went with 3 of my friends, Brad, Emma, and Cole. We got to the farm around 7 p.m. It was already dark, which made the maze more challenging and more fun. The maze was lit with lanterns every so often, just enough to see where you were going, but not enough to make it easy. The farm owner said the maze covered about 5 acres and usually took people 45 minutes to an hour to complete. We paid our entrance fee and headed in, laughing and joking around. The corn stalks were about 8 feet tall, creating walls on either side of the narrow paths. You could hear other groups somewhere in the maze, their voices carrying through the stalks. For the first 20 minutes or so, everything was normal. We took wrong turns, hit dead ends, and slowly worked our way through. Then Emma pointed out that we hadn't heard any other voices for a while. We stopped and listened, and she was right. The maze had been full of people when we entered, but now it was completely silent except for the wind rustling through the corn. Brad said maybe everyone else had finished already, which seemed unlikely given how long we'd been in there. We kept walking, trying to find our way out, but the paths seemed to go on forever. Every turn looked the same: tall corn, narrow dirt path, a lantern every 100 feet or so casting weird shadows. After another 15 minutes, Cole checked his phone and said we'd been in the maze for almost an hour. We should have been out by now. That's when we noticed something odd. We passed by a lantern that had a ribbon tied to it. Brad had tied that ribbon there about 10 minutes earlier as a marker so we'd know if we were going in circles. We'd somehow looped back to the same spot. But that shouldn't have been possible given the turns we'd taken. We tried a different path, being careful to mark our route. But 15 minutes later, we were back at the same lantern with Brad's ribbon. Emma was getting frustrated, saying this wasn't funny anymore and that the maze was poorly designed. But I was starting to think it wasn't the maze's fault. Something felt wrong. The air was too still, too cold. And I kept feeling like someone was walking behind us just out of sight. Cole suggested we just push through the corn and make our own path out. It wasn't elegant, but it would work. We picked a direction and started forcing our way through the stalks. The corn was thick and it scratched at our faces and hands, but we pushed through. After a few minutes of this, we broke through into a clearing, except it wasn't the parking lot or the exit. It was just an open circle in the middle of the maze, maybe 20 feet across. And in the center of the clearing was a scarecrow. None of us remembered seeing a scarecrow when we entered the maze. This thing was huge, at least 7 feet tall, mounted on a wooden cross. Its face was a burlap sack with holes cut for eyes and a mouth. Its clothes were tattered and old. Brad laughed and said it must be part of the maze design, meant to spook people. But as we stood there looking at it, the scarecrow's head tilted to the side. Not like the wind had blown it, but deliberately, mechanically, like someone had turned it. We all saw it. Emma screamed. The scarecrow's arm moved next, lifting slowly until it was pointing directly at us. We didn't stick around to see what would happen next. We ran back into the corn, crashing through stalks, not caring about the paths anymore. We just ran in what we thought was a straight line, hoping to hit the edge of the maze. Branches and leaves whipped at our faces, and I could hear my friends gasping for breath around me. I looked back once and immediately wished I hadn't. The scarecrow was following us. Not running, but walking with these long, impossible strides, gliding through the corn like it weighed nothing. We burst out of the maze into the parking lot and kept running until we got to Brad's car. We threw ourselves inside and locked the doors, panting and terrified. We sat there for a few minutes, trying to catch our breath and make sense of what had just happened. When we finally looked back at the maze entrance, there was a group of people coming out, laughing and chatting normally, like nothing was wrong. Brad drove us to a diner and we sat there for hours, trying to process everything. We all agreed on what we'd seen. The scarecrow had moved. It had followed us. But when we called the farm the next day to report it, they said there were no scarecrows anywhere in their maze. They'd specifically avoided them because some kids found them too scary. We told them about the clearing and the scarecrow pointing at us, and there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, the woman said they'd had problems years ago with someone putting unauthorized decorations in the maze as pranks. She thanked us for letting them know and said they'd investigate. I don't know what we saw in that maze. Maybe it was a person in a costume playing a cruel joke. But the way it moved, the way it seemed to know exactly where we were, the fact that the farm had no record of it being there, none of that made sense. All I know is that I'll never go through another corn maze again, especially not in November. Story 8. The Abandoned School. My name's Troy, and I'm into urban exploration. Basically, I like exploring abandoned buildings and taking photos. It's become a pretty popular hobby, and there are online communities dedicated to finding and documenting these places. Last November, on the 27th, I decided to check out an old elementary school that had been closed for about 15 years. The school was in a town about an hour from where I live in Pennsylvania. It had shut down due to budget cuts and had been sitting empty ever since. I'd seen some photos online and it looked like a perfect spot for exploration. The building was 3 stories tall with that classic brick exterior that you see in schools built in the 1950s. I arrived around 4 p.m. It was late November, so the sun was already starting to set. I should have waited until morning, but I wanted to get some shots during the golden hour when the lighting would be perfect. I found a window on the first floor that had been broken out and climbed through, being careful of the jagged glass still in the frame. The inside of the school was exactly what you'd expect. Vandalized walls, trash everywhere, broken furniture scattered through the hallways. The lockers were all open and empty, some of them hanging off their hinges. I made my way through the first floor, taking photos of classrooms with old chalkboards still showing lessons from the last day of school. It was eerie, but in a cool way. I found the stairwell and decided to head up to the second floor. The stairs were concrete and seemed solid enough, so I wasn't worried about structural issues. The second floor was more of the same. Empty classrooms, peeling paint, water damage on the ceilings. I was getting some great shots. Really atmospheric stuff. That's when I heard it. A bouncing sound like a basketball being dribbled. It was coming from down the hallway, echoing off the walls. I froze and listened. Bounce, bounce, bounce. Steady and rhythmic. I called out, asking if anyone was there, figuring it was maybe another urban explorer or some kids messing around. The bouncing stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. Then I heard footsteps, small ones like a child running. They were coming toward me. I raised my camera, ready to take a photo of whoever it was, but no one appeared. The footsteps ran right past me, so close I should have seen who it was, but there was nothing there. My rational brain tried to explain it away. Old building, weird acoustics, maybe an animal. But I knew what I'd heard. Those were human footsteps, a child's footsteps, and they'd run within inches of me. I decided to leave, heading back toward the stairs. But when I got there, I found the stairwell door was closed. I knew I'd left it open. I always leave doors open when exploring abandoned places so I don't get trapped. I tried the handle, and it was locked. From a door that shouldn't even have a working lock. I pulled harder, getting frustrated, and that's when I heard laughing. Children's laughter coming from all around me. Multiple voices echoing through the empty hallways. The sound bounced off the walls until I couldn't tell where it was coming from. I started trying other doors, looking for another stairwell or any way down. Most of the classroom doors were stuck or blocked by debris. The laughter continued, sometimes close, sometimes far away, but never stopping. Then I heard a voice call out my name. A child's voice saying Troy in a sing-song way. That's when I really started to panic. Nobody knew I was there. I hadn't told anyone where I was going, which I realized was incredibly stupid. How did this voice know my name? I found another stairwell at the far end of the building and ran for it. The door was unlocked, thankfully, and I practically flew down the stairs. I made it to the first floor and ran through the hallways back to the window I'd entered through. Behind me, I could hear the sound of many small feet running, chasing me. When I got to the window, I didn't even care about the broken glass. I dove through it, landing hard on the ground outside. I scraped my hands and tore my jacket, but I didn't stop. I ran to my car and got out of there as fast as I could. When I reviewed my photos later that night, my hands were shaking. Most of them were normal, just empty classrooms and hallways. But there was one photo that made me delete my entire camera roll. It was a shot I'd taken of a hallway on the second floor. In the background, barely visible in the darkness, were children. At least a dozen of them, standing in a line against the wall, all facing the camera. All staring directly at me. I reported my experience on the Urban Exploration Forum, and several people replied saying they'd had similar experiences at that school. One person said they'd researched the building's history and found that a fire had broken out there in 1962. Several children had died, trapped on the upper floors when the stairwells filled with smoke. The school had been rebuilt and reopened, but the person claimed something had never left. I don't do urban exploration anymore. That was my last trip. Whatever I experienced in that school, whether it was something paranormal or my mind playing tricks on me, I never want to feel that kind of fear again. The sound of children's laughter still makes me uncomfortable, and I deleted all my social media accounts related to exploration. I'm done with abandoned buildings. Story 9. The Grocery Store. I'm Rachel, and I work as a grocery store manager in a small town in Vermont. Our store is one of those 24-hour places that never closes, not even on holidays. Last year, on November 30th, I was working the closing shift, which meant I'd be there until the overnight crew came in at midnight. The store was pretty dead that evening. Just a few customers here and there buying last-minute items. By 10 p.m., there was only one customer left in the store. An older woman, probably in her 70s, with white hair and wearing a long dark coat. I'd seen her come in around 9:30, and she'd been slowly walking through the aisles with an empty cart ever since. I was restocking shelves near the back of the store when one of my cashiers, Tommy, called me on the radio. He said the old woman had been standing at the end of aisle 7 for the past 20 minutes, just staring down the aisle. He thought maybe she needed help finding something. I told him I'd check on her. I found her exactly where Tommy said she'd be, standing with her cart at the entrance to aisle 7. She was completely still, staring straight ahead. I approached her with a smile and asked if I could help her find anything. She didn't respond. Didn't even acknowledge that I'd spoken. I asked again, a little louder, thinking maybe she was hard of hearing. This time she slowly turned her head toward me. Her eyes were completely white. No pupils, no iris, just white. I stumbled backward, my heart jumping into my throat. The woman opened her mouth and said in a voice that didn't sound quite right, too deep and raspy, "Where are the children?" I didn't know what to say. What kind of question was that? I told her, stammering, that this was a grocery store and there were no children here. She turned her head back toward the aisle and repeated the question. "Where are the children?" I backed away and radioed Tommy, telling him to call the police. Something was very wrong with this woman. Maybe she had dementia or was having some kind of medical emergency. Tommy said he'd make the call and I should keep an eye on her until they arrived. I watched from a distance as the woman stood there, motionless. After a few minutes, she started pushing her cart down aisle 7, moving slowly. I followed at a safe distance, not wanting to lose sight of her. She stopped halfway down the aisle and reached up to one of the shelves. She grabbed a can of soup and held it up to her face, studying it. Then she bit into it. Not opened it, just bit right into the metal can like it was an apple. I heard the crunch of metal and saw soup dripping down her chin. She didn't react to what should have been incredibly painful. Just kept chewing, her mouth working mechanically. I was frozen in shock, watching this impossible thing happen right in front of me. She dropped the can, and it clattered to the floor, dented and torn where her teeth had been. That's when she turned to look at me again. Soup was running down her coat, and her mouth was moving like she was still chewing, but there was nothing there. She smiled, and I saw that her teeth were perfectly normal. No blood, no damage, like biting through metal had done nothing to her at all. She started walking toward me, and I backed up, nearly tripping over my own feet. I was calling for Tommy on the radio, practically yelling into it. The woman was getting closer, moving faster now, her cart abandoned behind her. She reached out one hand toward me, and I turned and ran. I ran to the front of the store where Tommy was standing behind the register, his eyes wide. I told him we needed to get out, but he pointed toward the entrance. The woman was already there, standing by the automatic doors, blocking the exit. How had she gotten there so fast? I'd just seen her in aisle 7. Tommy said the police were 5 minutes away, and we just needed to wait in the office. We ran to the back office and locked the door. Through the small window, I could see the woman walking through the store, looking down each aisle, still asking that same question. "Where are the children?" Over and over. We huddled in that office for what felt like forever, listening to her voice echo through the empty store. Sometimes she sounded far away. Sometimes she sounded like she was right outside the door. Tommy was on the phone with 911 giving them updates, but his voice was shaking. Finally, we heard sirens outside. The police had arrived. We waited another minute before opening the office door and carefully making our way to the front of the store. 2 officers were standing there looking around. They asked us where the woman was, and I pointed toward the back aisles, explaining what had happened. They searched the entire store. Every aisle, the bathrooms, the stockroom, the freezers. She wasn't there. The only evidence that anything had happened was that damaged soup can lying in aisle 7, teeth marks clearly visible in the metal. The officers took photos of it and filed a report, but I could tell they didn't know what to make of it. I checked the security footage the next day. The cameras showed the woman entering the store at 9:32 p.m., but after that, nothing. She never appeared on any of the other cameras. Not in the aisles, not at the checkout, nowhere. It was like she'd vanished the moment she walked through the doors. Except I knew she hadn't. I'd seen her. Tommy had seen her. And that soup can was real. I requested a transfer to day shifts after that, and the company approved it immediately. I haven't worked past 6 p.m. since then, and I never will again. Sometimes I still hear that voice in my head asking, "Where are the children?" And I have no idea what it meant or what that woman was looking for. I just know I never want to see her again. Story 10, The November Fog. My name is Ben, and I'm a long-haul truck driver. I've been driving cross-country routes for about 8 years now, and I've seen a lot of weird things on the road. Strange hitchhikers, odd roadside attractions, places that don't seem like they should exist. But nothing comes close to what happened to me on November 14th of last year. I was driving through Montana on Highway 2, heading west toward Spokane. It was around 3 a.m., and I was about 6 hours into my shift. The highway was empty, which wasn't unusual for that time of night in that part of the country. I hadn't seen another car in over an hour. The road stretched out ahead of me, long and straight, cutting through flat farmland. Then the fog rolled in. 1 minute the road was clear, and the next I was driving through the thickest fog I'd ever seen. My headlights barely penetrated it. I could see maybe 20 feet ahead, if that. I slowed down to about 30 miles per hour and turned on my hazard lights, even though there was no one else around to see them. I'd driven through plenty of fog before, so I wasn't too worried. I figured I'd just take it slow and careful until it cleared up. But after about 20 minutes of driving through the fog, I realized something was wrong. I should have passed through it by now. Fog banks don't last forever, especially moving at 30 miles per hour. But this fog just kept going, thick and gray and endless. I checked my GPS, and that's when I noticed the first problem. The GPS showed me on Highway 2, but according to the map, I should have passed through a town about 10 miles back. A town I definitely hadn't seen. I thought maybe the GPS was glitching, so I kept driving, figuring I'd just look for a mile marker to confirm my location, but I never saw a mile marker. In fact, I didn't see anything. No signs, no buildings, no other roads intersecting with the highway. Just fog and the dark pavement ahead of me. I started feeling uneasy. I turned on the radio to calm my nerves, but every station was just static. All of them. Like I was too far from any transmitter to pick up a signal, which didn't make sense. After another 30 minutes, I decided to pull over and wait for the fog to clear. But when I looked for a place to stop, I realized there was no shoulder. The highway just ended at the white line on either side. Beyond that line, I couldn't see anything. Just fog so thick it looked almost solid. I kept driving because I didn't have a choice. Stopping in the middle of the highway seemed more dangerous than continuing forward. My unease was turning into genuine fear. I tried my CB radio to see if I could reach any other truckers, but it was dead. Not static like the regular radio, just completely silent. That's when I saw the car. It appeared suddenly in my headlights, parked sideways across both lanes, blocking the entire highway. I slammed on my brakes, and my truck skidded to a stop about 15 feet from it. My heart was pounding as I sat there, staring at this car that had appeared out of nowhere. It was an old sedan, maybe from the 1980s, dark blue or green, hard to tell in the fog and the darkness. The driver's door was open and the interior light was on. I waited for a minute, expecting someone to appear, but no one did. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out of my truck, calling out to see if anyone needed help. No response. I approached the car slowly, my flashlight beam cutting through the fog. As I got closer, I could see that the car was empty. No one in the driver's seat, no one in the back. But the keys were still in the ignition, and the engine was running. I could hear it idling, see the exhaust coming from the tailpipe. I walked around to the open door and looked inside. There was a purse on the passenger seat and a child's car seat in the back. The radio was on, playing soft static. Everything looked normal, like someone had just stepped out for a moment. But where would they have gone? There was nothing out here but fog and highway. I called out again, louder this time, my voice disappearing into the thick fog. No answer. I was debating whether to call the police when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, and there was a woman standing about 10 feet away. She was wearing a dress that looked old-fashioned, like something from the 1950s, and her hair was done up in a style from that era, too. She asked me if I'd seen her daughter. Her voice sounded strange, distant, like it was coming from far away even though she was standing right in front of me. I told her I hadn't seen anyone and asked if she was okay, if she needed help. She ignored my questions and just repeated hers. "Have you seen my daughter?" I said no again and asked her where her daughter was. She pointed into the fog away from the highway and said she'd wandered off into the field. She needed to find her before it got dark. But it was already dark. It had been dark for hours. I offered to help her look, thinking maybe there really was a lost child out there. But as I started to follow her, she walked straight into the fog and vanished. Not like she'd walked far and I couldn't see her anymore, but like she'd ceased to exist the moment the fog touched her. One second she was there, the next she wasn't. I ran back to my truck and locked the doors. I didn't care about the car blocking the highway anymore. I just needed to get out of there. I put my truck in reverse and started backing up, figuring I'd turn around and head the other direction. But as I was reversing, I looked in my side mirror and saw that the car was gone. The highway ahead was clear, no vehicle blocking it at all. I stopped and looked forward through my windshield. The car was still there, exactly where it had been. But in my mirror, the road was empty. I closed my eyes and counted to 10, telling myself I was hallucinating from exhaustion. When I opened them, everything looked normal again. The car was there, the fog was there, and I was terrified. I decided to drive around the car. I carefully guided my truck onto what should have been the shoulder, even though I couldn't see where the road ended. I just drove slowly forward, steering around where the car was. My wheels bumped over something, maybe a curb or uneven ground, but I kept going until I was past the obstruction. Once I was clear, I gunned it. I didn't care if it was dangerous to drive fast in the fog. I just needed to get out of there. I drove for another hour and gradually the fog started to thin. By 5 a.m. I was out of it completely, driving under a clear sky with stars visible above me. I pulled into the next truck stop I found and checked my GPS again. According to the map, I'd made good time. I was exactly where I should have been based on when I'd entered the fog. But that didn't make sense. I'd been driving slowly for over 2 hours. I'd stopped. I'd gotten out of my truck. I should have been way behind schedule. Asked the attendant at the truck stop if he'd heard anything about an abandoned car or a missing person on Highway 2. He looked at me like I was crazy and said, there hadn't been any reports of anything like that. I didn't push it. I just got some coffee and got back on the road. I've driven that stretch of Highway 2 probably a dozen times since then, and I've never seen fog like that again. I've never seen that car or that woman, but every time I drive through Montana at night, I find myself watching for fog in my headlights, dreading the moment when it might roll in again. I don't know what I experienced that night. Whether it was real or some kind of hallucination or something else entirely, all I know is that it felt real, and it was the most frightening thing that's ever happened to me on the road. If you've made it through all 10 stories, thank you for reading. November is a dark month, and sometimes in that darkness, things happen that can't be explained. These stories are all true, exactly as they were told to me. Sleep well and remember to lock your doors.